insider information, and he's bringing it to the table with us here first at Leak Project. And this is some pretty scary stuff, you guys. Now, every 4 years, there is the presidential elections, and people get wound up about what's going to happen. And, you know, certainly it's because there is always that possibility. When you've got people with positions of power in high places, they oftentimes don't want to give that up. And just watch the TV series on Netflix, House of Cards, and I think that that will open up your eyes to certain possibilities. You know, oftentimes TV and movie does interrelate, you know, parallels of what's going on today, what's happened in the past, and they're presenting it to us to watch on the big screen. So, Marshall, it's great to have you with us here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
I'm good, Rex. It's glad to be back.
It's great to have you. And, you know, we didn't get a chance to talk about all that was going on with the predictions that Ed made, his black swan call, as you brought up. So let's get into that. And also I want to talk about the vision that you had, kind of that shared near-death experience that you talked about with me before the show, all the way back in '98. So we'll get started. Thank you so much.
Okay. The shared death vision was something that Ed was really in tune with, and I've seen it when I was there in 2015 in Reno, took his class. This is Fukushima. And in his other enigma section of his seminar, what he said is that Tokyo is already hot, that Fukushima is the worst disaster in the history of mankind from the past and going forward. And I had, in 1998, I had a shared death experience with my mother, which was very, very profound. I was on a Southwest Airlines flying from San Jose to Phoenix, and we had just taken off. And as soon as it was wheels up, that was it. I was out of my body, and I was with my mom. I knew instantly right there, and then she had passed before I had a chance to get there. And we were talking about family things, but she kept saying, I got to show you something, got to show you something, got to show you something. And finally, she took me by the hand, and we were standing on top of a tall hill, and I was overlooking the Monterey Bay in Northern California. Behind me was Half Moon Bay. I had just moved into the area a few months earlier. And what I saw was what will happen when we have the pole shift or the San Andrea event. Down by the old military base, there is just north of Monterey, there's the trench that comes in. Right at the neck of that trench, there was a huge uplift. I saw this large mountain, of just black mountain with lava pouring out of it, coming up out of the ground. And the lava was pouring forward into the Monterey Bay and creating a tremendous amount of steam. And the entire view turned white. Then it turned a blue-gray and gritty. And finally it settled, and I looked down at my feet, and I was standing in about 2 feet of fine volcanic ash. And then when I looked out, the entire Monterey Bay was just decimated. There was nothing left. A huge tsunami had come in. All that was remaining were some broken roadways, basements, foundations. There was no vegetation or life. I did see large telephone poles and trees, which were all pointing due west out to sea. And the area did expand a little bit, and I was looking at that. So I knew that this area is going to be tremendously devastated. However, it will survive the pole shift because it is on the western side of the San Andrea, the uplift side. And after the pole shift, what's left of much of California will be an archipelago of islands like the Hawaiian Islands. And then my mother took me into the future. And then it was very beautiful and verdant, and it looked more subtropical. It was very lush, very green compared to what it is now. So obviously there'd been a pole shift event, and the Earth had shifted maybe 10 to 12 degrees, which is what Ed says in August, that we would have a pole shift event, if we have a pole shift event, that approximately about a 12-degree shift. And what I had seen in 1998 in that shared death experience was precisely corroborated by what Ed said in terms of the degrees of shift. However, the one thing that was mysterious for me, because this happened in 1998, was that when I went into the future, I could see that there was life had returned. It was at dusk, and there were a few lights up in the hills. But along the beach, and I lived in this area for 18 years, and it was just absolutely incredibly beautiful. I loved it. And walking on the beach, seeing the birds and the sea life, and a very verdant area rich in local life forms. There was nothing. The water was just blue and lifeless. The beach, now if you see it, it's brown because they're really the erosion problem. They keep putting in sand. But the beach that I saw in the future looked like cane sugar. It was just bleached white. And there was absolutely no sign of life, no birds, no sea animals. I didn't even see any footprints on the sand. I mean, nothing was going near it. It was all pristine looking, all beautiful, and very devoid of any form of life or evidence of life, passing through that. And that really mystified me for many years. I never could understand that. And I did find the place where I was shown this 2 years later, which is on a hill up by the University of Santa Cruz. Actually, I walked to the very exact spot where I had stood next to my mother in this shared death experience when she was showing me all of this. I was looking at this lifeless scene in the future when the wheels came down. It was an hour and 45-minute flight. And that was kind of a rude awakening because I opened my eyes, and the next thing I knew, I got slapped so hard in the face I thought I'd knock a tooth out. And I'm looking at this stewardess, and she's rearing back to give me another crack across the face. And I go, whoa, 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 what are you doing? And stop this, stop hitting me. And she
What
looks
flight
at
was
me.
this on? I'm not going on that flight.
Yeah. Just give me the peanuts, please.
Jeez.
And it was southwest from San Jose to Phoenix. And she turned and looked at this other stewardess and said, tell the captain to radio Phoenix, we don't need the ambulance. And then she looked at me and said, I thought you had a stroke. I've been slapping your face for the last half hour. You won't wake up. I mean, we thought you had a stroke.
She slapped you so hard, she almost gave you brain damage. She almost caused you to have a stroke. She was she's shaking you, slapping you around. Oh, I thought he was dead, so I just had to make sure.
Really? And it was, let's say, jarring. And interestingly enough, when I got home, I was checking and researching. Actually, there was an intersection of two major fault lines, one to San Andrea, with two smaller fault lines running between the two. So it literally was a rectangular plug. And the geologist said, yeah, that would be the perfect place for what you saw to happen, like a cork coming out of a champagne bottle. But the immediate thing for me is that it was what I saw. It was a dead Pacific, okay? But I didn't understand it. I couldn't make sense of it until 3/11 and Fukushima. And I can tell you that in 2015, when I took Ed's class, He just is soul sick about that, what he sees. And in in this, what my source, who was there for this conference on August 27th, said is that according to Ed, they do not know where the cores are. Well, the corium have left the building, so to speak. What we actually have at Fukushima is a classic China syndrome. The cores have melted through the foundation and they are now beneath the plant. And what's really bad about that is beneath the plant is a large underground river that runs directly out to sea. And so these cores are in this underground river and they're pumping radiation. It's just a continual radiation pump. Now, our government, which has been lying to us boldly, and well, things dissipate, they dilute. No, radiation doesn't dissipate and dilute; it accumulates, and that's exactly what's happening. Ed said on the 27th that Tokyo is hot, which is consistent. They're having increased with the children. There's incidents of leukemia. Right now, the Japanese government is negotiating with Myanmar to move population if necessary. Also makes me wonder if they're talking with the Chinese about some of those cities that they built and never occupied inland. But the Japanese are facing a real crisis, and Tokyo will become a dead city. Many cities will. I think for all of us here in the United States, and actually anywhere, if you are near a nuclear plant that is using this similar kind of reactor design, the reactors at Fukushima were GE type ones, which have long been known to be defective by design. All right. And there were a lot of people who wanted to have them taken offline and dismantled for more safer designs. What happened was everybody was, oh my gosh, we're going to go broke. You're going to destroy our fortunes. And so they created a retrofit that strengthened the reactor, but it was more cosmetic than anything else. And boom, you have Fukushima. There's a lot of technology to understand exactly what happened, why it failed. But I think that it all comes down to a simple statement as to why we have Fukushima. 1 less 0. What does that mean? From an engineering standpoint, you're in an area where, Japan is incredibly seismic. And you can design your plant to survive a 100-year event, or you can design it to survive a 1,000-year event. When they built the Fukushima plants, they said, well, they're going to have a service life of about 40 years, which is nonsense because you're just seeing these old reactors being extended and extended and extended. But 40 years.
That's insane. Sorry to interrupt, but just 40 years for a nuclear reactor, that's insanity. I mean, that's like asking for problems.
Absolutely. And so, they have 40-year lifespan, which they're saying, well, this is within a 100-year cycle. So 100 years is all the safety we need. And it's cheap because if you build for a 1,000-year event, your engineering costs are going to double, triple. It's going to be a much more expensive plant. But if they added a 0 and said, instead of building the plant for a 100-year event, we're going to build it for a 1,000-year event, we would not be seeing what we're seeing today, which is the death of the Pacific Ocean. And that is going to have long-term ramifications for all life on our planet. All life on our planet. And, how much life can be sustained. So I agree completely with that. This is the worst disaster in the history of the human species, and it will continue to be the worst disaster in the human species. But also this design, there's hundreds of these things around the world. They're tea kettles. And, everyone says, well, they can scram the reactor. Well, yeah, that's what you can do. But the point of it is, even after you scram the reactor, you have to keep it cool. And it takes a couple of years for it to cool down. So if you do not have working pumps and water, then you're going to have a Fukushima event. Here in the United States, we could easily have 100 Fukushimas or more. That is the reason why when I'm doing relocation webinars, I'm always telling people, if you are, located within a region served by a nuclear plant, you want to be at the minimum 50 miles upwind and 100 miles downwind. And the further, the better. So, that is an important thing. That's an important thing. And, but, also, since the last time we talked, I mean, I know that folks have been asking about this 57-year transit of the perihelion for Planet X that Ed was talking about. And that Ed then said what he saw with remote viewing was 6 months. And I'd like to get into that a little more, Rex, because I think that is an absolutely important topic, and for reasons I'll explain.
Absolutely. And one of the things I was also going to bring up in the last interview, you quoted Ed as saying it will take 6 months for this Planet X return, or the orbit of Nibiru, and you could either trust him and the work that he's done, or else you could trust Farada, and he talks about a 57-year orbit. Have you done any more diving into that?
Yeah, well, simply put, as a Planet X researcher and author, I have written more about Carlos Muñoz Farada, the Chilean astronomer who announced the existence of Planet X in 1940. I have written more about him than anyone else alive, period. Statement of fact. And when I heard that, according to Ed, that Farada said that there were 57, it was a 57-year transit of the perihelion phase, I knew that was a red herring immediately. That was something that was classic disinformation that was fed to him. I think, it was part of a Faustian deal that Ed made because he has to work with intelligence agencies. One of the things that he said during his August 27th seminar, and I think this is really important, is that he was not only in the CIA, he was in the CIA's inner sanctum, holy of holies, if there's such a thing. And he said that those people have no light in their eyes. In other words, they've got black doll eyes like a shark. It's lifeless. And he said that he used to be one of them, but he couldn't do it any longer. And this was an interesting comment. I have a direct quote, word for word. And for those of you who are younger, please put your ears on. But Ed said, I knew we were right. All right. So that's who we're dealing with in these agencies. These are people that, they're not like us. They're cold, dispassionate. They're only interested in power, maintaining their dominance and control. And so that brings me back to Farada and 57 years of this perihelion transit. Now, For those of your listeners and viewers out there that are not familiar with this, let me just take a moment to kind of give you just a brief, rough view of the celestial mechanics that we're talking about here. The Planet X system, it is a system. It has the sun in the center and planets and moons around it in a mini constellation. And it is in a long comet-like elliptical orbit, which means it goes far away from the sun and then comes in. And when it's at furthest distance away, that's its point of aphelion. And its closest distance is its point of perihelion, where it's closest to the sun. Now, the sun's, think of the galactic plane like the sun's equator, which is not our equator. Our equator is tilted because we're tilted on our axis. The sun's equator, and that's what all the planets are, all the major planets in our system are going around. And you have the northern skies above the galactic plane, or the plane of our system, the ecliptic, and then you have the southern skies. Now, when the Planet X system is in the southern skies, it doesn't present a problem for us. It's only when it crosses the ecliptic and comes up, swings to its point of perihelion, which is closest to the sun, and then heads back down. That is when it is a problem. Now, with regards to 57 years, first thing came to my mind was red herring. It simply doesn't jive with the astronomy. Kepler's second law, look it up. And 57 years is utterly nonsense. But 57 years, and here's what puts it in context. And Ed said when he made that statement, it won't be a problem for us, it'll be a problem for our grandchildren. Well, that is deferment, all right? And that's the thing. It's like, oh, it's going to be a problem. We'll see it, but it's not going to happen on my watch. Someone else is going to have to deal with it. So I'm not going to give it that much concern. And that's very, very misleading, because what Kepler's second law tells us is that in this orbit, the Planet X system, when it reaches perihelion, is going to be going at an incredibly fast speed. It's whipping around the sun 3 to 4 times faster than it would at its furthest distance from the sun. So this is a massive increase in speed. And a good way to think about it is you're at an amusement park. And remember the ride, the whip, the one you have the 2 huge turnbuckles on opposite sides facing, and then you're in a cart, and then the cart is following this long belt that goes around. And so when you're between the turnbuckles, you're waving at your friends and trying to look interesting, but it's boring because you're tediously moving along at a very slow rate. But when you get to that turnbuckle and you whip around like that, and you get that real momentary thrill. Well, that's Kepler's second law right there. All right. And the only difference being is that with Nemesis and our sun Sol, there's only one turnbuckle. And that's our sun Sol, because Nemesis orbits around it. But when it comes to its point of perihelion, its closest distance, the speed is dramatically faster. So 57 years is a misnomer. That's really something, again, to get people to defer and to say, well, it's not, I don't have to plan and prepare for this. I don't need to do anything for it. So why is it that these people with lifeless eyes would want everybody to think that, well, it's not going to happen on my watch? It's simple. They want you to die in place. They don't want you to be prepared. They want the maximum death toll possible. And the last thing they want to see are people who intend to survive this and to help usher in a new future for humanity. That's the last thing they want to see. So That's all that 57 years is. You can go on, Google it, go to any search engine you want. Yeah, you're going to come up empty-handed. If you do find something, it'll be someone talking about something. It's going to be a chat room message. It's going to be a fabrication. It's going to be nonsense. Again, nobody has written more about Carlos Muñoz Ferrada than I have. 57 years is bull feathers. Period. If you don't believe me, look up Kepler's second law. So then Ed says 6 months. Now, in the morning, he gave everyone that CIA disinformation nonsense of 57 years for a perihelion transit. And I think that was part of a Faustian bargain that Ed made so that, remember, in his promotions, he's going unclassified. He's going to talk about what's unclassified now. And that was something where clearly, there's no science to back it up. There's no history to back it up. It's certainly nothing that Ferrada would have said. It's just a red herring that doesn't even begin to pass the smell test. Only if you want people to die in place because you're an intelligence agency. That's the only thing that makes it stick. If you want to participate in that, of course, that's your decision. Go ahead, defer judgment. Just say it's not going to happen on my watch when I see it. Now, let's talk about the 6 months. Well, that is consistent with everything that you see. And I talk about in my latest book, Surviving the Planet X Tribulation. I talk about this at great length. I detail it very closely. And one of the things that Ed said is in December of 2017, when we see Planet X, it'll be about the size of the moon. I wanted to show you this because the illustration on the cover, which was painted by my wife, Jennifer, came to me in a waking vision. And this was actually more of what I saw with a very, very angry sun, and where Nibiru is significantly larger than our moon. But that's not to say that Ed was wrong. We will see it look about the size of a moon at some point over the years. It has been increasing in size, and it will decrease in size. So inevitably, we will see it at the size of a moon. Inevitably, we will see it in December 2017. But, you're already reporting a lot of sighting reports on your channel, Rex, that are excellent. And I follow your work, and I see a lot of other sighting reports. And we see these videos, and there's a lot of videos, by the way, that are posted that are disinformation. I don't want to name names or anything, but things that I see that are ridiculous are these dances with clouds videos where you're seeing lights poking through the clouds and they're going, that's it. That's, well, no, you don't know where that light source is coming from. You need to have a clear viewing sky. You have a lot of these observation sightings that are, they're questionable. I'm also seeing where some of the kinds of things we were seeing a year ago are resurfacing and being repackaged. So you have to be careful. The disinformation operatives that are wanting you to be dismissive of all of this are intentionally planting a lot of garbage because, what does that do? It creates fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You can't get a good, clear beat on things. So you don't know who to trust. So what do? You defer. If you defer, you do not prepare. If you do not prepare, you do not relocate, you die in place. It's real simple. Although people have a hard time admitting that to themselves. They can't imagine that level of barbarity and inhumanity, but I see it. It's clearly there. And here's where, Rex, I want to make a public opinion, a speculation, if you will. But when Ed said that in the morning, he was on the reservation, so to speak. But then he thought about it, and he knew that that statement would result in the death of, well, many of the people in that room looking at him that had paid to be there. I think he had a moment of conscience. And in the afternoon, when he came back and he announced 6 months for the perihelion transit, which means you better darn well prepare. This is going to happen in your lifetime, on your watch. And if you love your life, you better get off your tuchus and do something about it. That's the message that Ed really gave, which is what he had seen with his remote viewing time. That being said, once Ed made the statement, I think I have it here in my notes, Ed's, and this is a direct quote, word for word. Ed said on August 27th, it will take 6 months, that is for the perihelion transit, and you can either trust me and the work we've done or trust Farada. Once Ed said that, he went off the reservation. And I want to say publicly, I now am concerned for Ed. I believe that in this moment of honesty and integrity, he put his life in jeopardy. This is a man who's probably signed more non-disclosure agreements than he cares to remember. And one thing the elites really take umbrage with is people who sign their little "thou shalt not talk to anybody about the evil that we do" agreements, and then go do that because they have a moment of conscience. That's when people die mysterious deaths, such as committing suicide by stabbing yourself 17 times in the back. I'm not making a joke here, Rex. Okay? I see way too much death out there. I see so many astronomers dying mysterious deaths and no investigations, no perpetrators are apprehended. They just die bizarre, violent deaths. All right.
Not just astronomers, but also the people that are in alternative medical. You know, so people that come out and expose stuff that's in vaccines and medicine and stuff like that, they have a very short lifespan lately. And it seems like anybody that tries to jump out of this narcissistic, feed off of negative energy system, well, that's when they start to come after you sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so the control is, it's paramount. I call it squeezing the tomato. At some point you squeeze a tomato, you're just going to wind up with a crushed tomato and, juice and pulp all over the place. But they're squeezing the tomato. They see the handwriting on the wall that despite all of their, ideas and notions about how they're going to maintain control, they don't have the popular support of the people. And without the popular support of the people, you have to do things that are going to be very, very extreme. And I think that brings us to some of the other enigmas, as Ed talked about, and what's really happening right now, and things that we need to be concerned with, because these are, to me, really harbinger signs of what's coming. If you go to my website, yowusa.com, and you read the signs articles that we're posting, my wife, Jennifer, does those, and she does a brilliant job of them. They're gut-wrenching for her to do when she every time she does one, it just breaks her heart. And one of the things that we're noticing is that there's a very, very clear pattern of disinformation, misinformation, and cover up in the mainstream media that when they do report important Earth changes events, uh, they localize them, say, well, this is a problem that happened there, but it's not happening somewhere else. They'll trivialize it, they'll dismiss it, or they won't even cover it. The only time you really get the coverage is if you start looking to alternative media, and there the reporting is vibrant, it's excellent. It's one of the reasons why right now I'm very
Right as you started to say that, Marshall, we're getting cut off.
of the internet to an international consumption.
That all just got cut off, by the way, what you just said there. It went into robot mode as we were talking. Like
Oh my God.
that last part when you said the alternative media is great, and then all of a sudden it went, don't, 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 don't. So what were you saying there?
Once ICANN is ruling the internet, we're probably going to wind up with a Chinese style internet with minders and who and what we can talk about and where we can talk about things. There's going to, I see suppression coming and in a very horrible way. Now, what's going to give them the cause to implement this destruction of free speech on a global basis? Well, here's some of the things that Ed said on the 27th of August about what's coming and what's already happening. First, he said an economic collapse is coming, that it is already happening, but in slow motion. I think Brexit was a huge propelling event, particularly for the euro. But if you're looking at the United States, our currency is, we're printing it, and we're not even printing it. It's just numbers in a database in a computer, and they're just increasing the numbers. Uh, we're to a point where we have so much national debt, we can't repay it. All right. So that means something major has got to break loose. It reminds me of what was happening in Germany during the Weimar Republic, where at a certain point, to buy a loaf of bread, you had to have a wheelbarrow loaded with currency just to go down to the bakery to buy a loaf of bread. And because the currency had become fiat, it was, it wasn't backed by anything. Ours is not backed by anything. So yes, an economic collapse is happening. Ed expects that North Korea will detonate a nuke in 45 days. Could be a test, but there are a lot of other sources that are deeply concerned that North Korea will actually use an atomic weapon against South Korea and nuke Seoul. If that happens, the ramifications are just breathtaking. Now, here was something he said, and I thought it was based on the what I'm getting from my sources, reliable sources, that is very poignant. He said that he expects a major terrorist attack in Europe in the September-October timeframe, and that it will probably happen in Germany or France. Well, what I have confirmed is that in Germany, it is a fact the government there has issued a mandate to the German people to stockpile 21 days of food. This is not, something that is, woo-woo channels on the internet. This is solid information. The government of Germany has told its citizens stockpile 21 days of food. No reason given. Also, in addition to that, there are significant troop movements, especially for American troops stationed in Germany, and because Germany is a major NATO component. But also, I found of interest that it tells me that this terror attack could probably be biological in nature, is that Germany is drafting doctors. They've begun sending letters to the doctors to tell them to report for duty. And it's not where they're saying, you have a month or 2 months or 3 months. They're giving a few days or maybe a couple of weeks at most. But they are drafting doctors. So the German government is ramping up for something. Now, Ed said on the 27th, that after that event happens in Europe, that there will be a false flag attack in the United States. He doesn't know what or where, the particulars, how it's going to happen. But essentially, what will happen is once it hits in Germany or France, we're going to have another 9/11 style event hitting us here. Once they've done that, then they can really use that to tighten up control, to stifle free speech on the internet. We go into a global one world security state. In terms of the election coming on, there is something that I think was very interesting in Ed's comments, that Barack Obama will be the last president for the United States. Actually, I've felt that way for a long time. He said that the election may be postponed due to emergency or attack, or maybe after the election, but before the inauguration, something will happen to enable Obama to remain as president temporarily. Well, this is interesting because Richard Shaw, Pinlight Productions in Hollywood, is working on Torah codes, and he's producing a lot of video on that and working with the rabbis in Israel. Interestingly enough, we are seeing a huge amount of Planet X information coming out of Israel right now. Huge. And the Torah codes, this is a very academic and disciplined approach, much more than we've heard of the Bible code. All right. But Torah code really is the academic pursuit of that. It's very rigorous. Rabbis do it, statisticians do it, people with very advanced skills. This is looking for hidden codes in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, or for the Torah or the Tanakh for the Jewish people. And in there, Donald Trump is clearly mentioned, and it says there will be an assassination attempt on him. It doesn't say that the assassination attempt will be successful and that he will die. It just says that there will be an assassination attempt. So when Ed says that something is going to happen after the election but before the inauguration, I think that's most likely going to be the case. If I were, a gambling man, to say that, yes, I think Trump is going to win the election, hands down. It'll be a blowout. Hillary is the elitist candidate, but even the elites are worried about her ability physically to perform. There's already pictures where there's, she has a urine catch bag around her ankle. She's having several different medical issues, so she's probably not physically sufficient for the office. But I think Trump, on the other hand, he's just popular. He's just coming on like a freight train. He wins the election, but after he wins the election and before the inauguration, something happens. And at that point, we're looking at a third term with Barack Obama. That's not good news. So these are the things that, he was really talking about in his other, category, which was pretty much most of the day. He only spent 40 minutes talking about Planet X. And, that's pretty much, everything that we see on aliens. It was interesting, his comments on aliens. Uh, he said that ETs are transdimensional beings and they can project their minds and how they want to appear, and that we really do not understand them. He said a lot of what we see in the sky are plasma tools used by the ETs. Crop circles are made with plasma tools, orbs, which are projected from very far away, take only 8 seconds. I reported on this years ago when I was really studying crop circles extensively. And there's been video shot of a formation that was actually literally took 8 seconds to form. And the orbs come in and they are creating the formation perfectly. And so crop circles, there's a lot of disinformation about, it's a couple of drunk guys with planks running around in the middle of the night and stomping on it. Well, that's nonsense because authentic crop circles form within seconds. And the important thing is what happens to the plants. If it's a hoax formation, the plants are broken because for the plants, it's a violent process. But with a genuine crop circle, the plant just simply lays down on its side and continues to grow. There is radiation in the process because the nodes in the plant will swell up. And so you have swollen nodes. And so there's very clear and easy ways to tell about it. Also, ingress and egress. If it's a genuine formation, you're not going to see footprints for people going in and going out. Whereas with a hoax, there'll be ingress and egress. You're going to see people walking in and walking out and walking between different glyphs in the formation. So, and I agree with what Ed said, is that they're throwing us clues about information with crop circles. If you can figure this out, we'll throw you something else. It's baby steps. And so for me, it is very much a form of communication. In my book, Crossing the Cusp, I documented a formation that appeared in Avebury, England, and that was in 2008, and it was a double formation, and one part of the formation formed in one day, and 2 or 3 days later, the second part of it formed, but it was completely integrated, and the parts overlapped to the point where the completed formation was so large, it was 4 times the size of a soccer field. It's huge, massive. No signs of ingress or egress, blown nodes, plants were growing. There was clear disinformation cover up. There was some mowing that was done on it afterwards. But it was the one that clearly showed Planet X and where it was in relationship to the system on December 21, 2012, based on the alignments. I documented that very carefully in my book, Crossing the Cusp. So, the bottom line, what Ed is saying is that, they're giving us clues with the crop circles. Yeah, if we can figure out a clue, they feed us another one. That the ETs could help us with technology, but they're not going to do that. It's not their thing. They're not going to make us dependent on them for technology. When asked about Bigfoot, he said they appear to ET tourists. He said they're tourists, extraterrestrial tourists, and that they're incredibly intelligent and very psychic creatures. going back to what we said in our last interview about the Anunnaki, and made a joke 4 times, and everyone laughed every time. And what he said, and this is a direct quote, again, I'm giving you word for word direct quote. It's just a question of how many women we have to give up. And he threw it as a joke, and the audience laughed, but he did that 4 times. Okay. So you repeat a joke 4 times, well, maybe it's not a joke.
Let me
Now,
ask
in
you
my
this,
current
Marshall,
book,
real
pardon?
quick. I was just going to throw this out there. Do you think that maybe he did that to make people think that it wasn't a joke, yet at the same time it could have been kind of a disinformation piece, or for those in the know, that could have been code for something else?
All of the above. Ed's a complex fellow. And uh, I think that Ed was being as honest as he could be. Although you know, when he tossed out the Farada 57-year red herring, that was just disinformation. And he said, we've remote viewed this and it's 6 months. He went off the reservation. There's no question in my mind. Ed made some very powerful and nasty people very angry. And my worry personally is that Ed's life is in jeopardy because of this. I would hate to see we suddenly find out Ed Dames has died a mysterious death. And that's what could very well happen. So I'm worried for him as a Planet X researcher in that regard. Uh, you know, on the remote viewing, let me just take a moment to talk about that because a lot of people are not really sure, well, what is remote viewing? Okay. And uh, you probably have heard of channeling, all right, where a psychic is talking across the veil to the other side. And you've also probably heard about fortune telling. So let's talk about fortune telling, then let's talk about channeling, and then let's talk about RV. Fortune telling is a hit or miss, and it's a risky proposition because people can be hooked into dark spirits who are always looking to get access and want to feed off your life force energy. Dark spirits cannot create life force energy. The only way they can obtain it is through a parasitic process of fomenting trouble and causing worry and anxiety, any negative emotion. Negative emotion is a milking machine for them. That's how they pull your life force energy. Because again, they're dark. They're going away from creator and away from the light. And so they need that light, though. They need that life force energy. They need that prana, if you will, that comes from having a relationship with creator to exist. Otherwise, they're just simply going to descend into the oblivion, and then it's death eternal. That's it. It'll be as though you never existed. So these dark spirits are really trying to parasitically feed off people by fomenting trouble. You're very susceptible to that with fortune telling, Ouija boards, things like that. So there are a lot of precautions that, religions make about that, and there is a basis for those precautions. With channeling, this is where you're having essentially telepathic conversation with the other side. You're crossing the veil. And someone who is doing this, the ones that are really good are the ones that do have a valuable relationship with Creator. They value it and they don't compromise on it. These are good people. I've worked with many of them. The most talented that I found were usually women in their, I would say 40s and 50s in a very loving and supportive marriage where their husbands believe in their ability and support them. Don't, they're not running around and deriding them and criticizing them and threatening them. And we see a lot of that. I call them denier spouses, and they can be very ugly. But these are women who have these natural gifts, and they're very lovely people in temperament, very honest, very kind, very caring, and they know how to shield themselves. They know how to do this so that they can pierce the veil, go to the other side without being hijacked by a dark spirit imposter who is just going to use them to foment trouble. Those are very good, the ones that know how to do it safely. And then you have remote viewing. With fortune telling, which is risky and not advisable, and with channeling, you are having a conversation with an entity across the veil. With remote viewing, you're not having a conversation. You're going directly to the Book of Life, the Akashic Records. Ed, in his classes, calls it, um, you know, uh, he refers to it as what, oh, this slips my mind now. Neo and the Matrix.
Okay.
Matrix. Yeah.
They're sending MK Ultra waves your way right now, so you can't remember it.
Yeah. There you go.
They're
And, I don't know if I should laugh at that.
right.
But he calls it the Matrix. What you're really doing is you're getting to the Akashic Record, the Book of Life, and it works very well. Now, a good example of connecting with the Akashic Record, the Book of Life, is years ago I interviewed a woman, Phyllis Schlemmer, I think was her name, and she was part of a study this very wealthy individual was conducting back in the 60s or early 70s, and had a large estate with multiple cottages, and he would bring in the brightest and the best from across the country. And they would actually be in that cottage together, 4 or 5 people. Well, she was in a cottage with Gene Roddenberry and was spending time, and Gene got to know her very well. And I said, hey, why don't you come to Hollywood and work for me? And she said, no, it's a corrupt industry. I don't want to be there. No, thank you. But then she told Roddenberry something that at first really angered him. And she said, the reason why you have such a wealth of wonderful stories for your Star Trek franchise is that you have subconsciously tapped into the Akashic Record. And she said Roddenberry really recoiled at that. He didn't like it. He says, what do you mean? Because it's Hollywood. You want to be the genius. You want to be the one that comes up with the ideas. And, now you're just getting ideas from someplace else. How special does that make you? It's not something that works well for ego aggrandizement. But she said he thought about that. And then finally, not only did he accept it, he came to appreciate that because he realized that he was tapping into the Akashic Record, and he was actually, his stories were derived from actual real life accounts that have happened throughout the universe for eons. And he's seeing things that are happening in other worlds. And so consequently, he knew he would never, ever, ever run out of new ideas for Star Trek. And he never did. It wasn't only until he passed away that it started becoming a little bit formula. And so that is the power of the Akashic Record. Now, let's compare channeling to remote viewing, because the CIA and the Russian intelligence agencies, they use both. They use both extensively, both channeling and remote viewing. Channeling and remote viewing, for the person that's doing it, the method of access is exactly the same. You're going through the right hemisphere of the brain, and with a channeler, what you're doing is you are having a communication across the veil, or you're astral projecting. You're just flying somewhere and seeing something. If you're remote viewing, you're going through the right hemisphere of your brain, but you're tapping straight into the Akashic record. It's it's a safer way to go and find information. Now, in Russia, the Russian intelligence agencies prefer channeling psychics, if you will, over remote viewing. They use both, but their preference is for psychics. In the United States, it's the opposite. The United States uses both, but prefers remote viewers because remote viewing is something that many, many more people can do. They have a much larger population of people. It is something that, when I took the class from Ed, I found that I had a natural gift for it, which I think is really more of an outgrowth of my other efforts, my other psychic efforts. And I proved to myself, there's no question about it. It's very, very real. Remote viewing works. Now, I took Ed's class with one thing in mind. I wanted to know, would remote viewing be useful in terms of surviving a tribulation and in planning and preparation? Having taken the class, which I would like to thank Gloria in Washington for helping me, that she arranged that an anonymous donor got me into the class. But there was no question about it that it is a very, very, very valuable skill if you are serious about planning and preparation. It's the safest way to go beyond your five senses. It's safer than channeling or psychic, and certainly light years more safer than fortune telling. And for all of your viewers out there and listeners, I would really strongly urge you to do that. Ed said that he would be retiring on August 31st, but that he would continue doing two things. He would continue doing remote viewing for private sanctuary locations. And he would dabble in that, or his staff would help him do that. And then the other thing is he'll, make infrequent appearances, I suppose, on Coast to Coast with George Nuri. And he's worked with George over the years, and they've done a lot of excellent interviews together. So I'm glad to hear that he's going to keep a hand in with Coast. On the relocation, absolutely, definitely, for those of you who want to do it. In the class, it was interesting because you would see where you're going to relocate to, or you would see something that, well, you'd be sorry you saw it. And if you saw something where, like a ship sailing away, instead of seeing a place, that it was a place of refuge, you were seeing something else. It was likely not a good message for you. I remember one of the gentlemen saw a hospital surgery. And when Ed teaches the class, what he does is he will say, here's your target, and he just gives you numbers. That's it. You don't know there's no way to make sense of it. Whatever it is, it's in his briefcase. He's got the answer to that. All you're given is numbers. And at that point, you do your remote viewing. And remote viewing is interesting because you're projecting yourself into that. And what you're really recording is all your senses and feelings about it. Literally, what does it smell like? Are we looking at structures? What about colors? What about sounds? You have all of these impressions and you pull them together to make a remote viewing reading. And at the time I did the class, I was divorced. and really I wasn't involved with anyone. Uh, didn't think I would be at that time because, you know, go on eHarmony and tell me if there's a category for, do you believe in Planet X? You know, you
You just gave
definitely.
me a brilliant idea, Marshall.
What's
Absolutely.
that?
We need to start a dating service for Planet X and other like-minded individuals that think that, either Planet X or survival, conspiracy-related stuff. I'll bet you we could get some really cool minds together, and people would be super happy, and they'd live their lives with the people they love. That's an idea. Thank you, Marshall. I'm going to remember that.
Well, Rex, if there's somebody that could pull it off, it's you. It'd really be a blessing for a lot of people out there because only 1 in 4 people who are in awareness are in a marriage where or a significant relationship where they have support from their opposite. The other 80% have denier spouses, and they're the ones that are, with the nuclear option. If you don't stop this, I'm going to divorce you, leave you, whatever, threats and all of that, and which is really, really awful. So that would be a real blessing if you could do that, seriously. And but what was interesting for me was at the time, I felt, well, I was just gonna have, the best I could hope for was serial monogamy at that point, you know. And basically, the minute that, finally someone says, "What do you really do for a living?" That's it. Okay, the party's over.
Right.
The but yeah, when he gave us coordinates, and this was the second day of the class, and when he was finished, he said, "Okay, what you've just remote viewed is your sanctuary." And what I remote reviewed and what I saw when I did the RV in my sanctuary was I was inside a structure within a structure, and that I was with someone. I had a spouse. I had someone close to me, and that's what I had seen. And sure enough, the following year, with meeting Jennifer, and we're both very much working together, shoulder to shoulder now, doing this work. Her science article are brilliant. Jennifer, she even, again, I'm so proud she did the cover on this book, and I just love it every time I see it. And she put so much work into it and editing it with me, and it's so nice to have someone to go shoulder to shoulder with. I didn't think it was possible when I saw that during my remote viewing class with Ed, but sure enough, it was an affirmation of what I had seen. So remote viewing works, and it's safe. And for those of you that would eventually want to build your psychic skills, I think remote viewing is the right first step, because the point of contact being the right hemisphere of the brain, being aware of what you're doing, very clearly being cognizant of what's happening during the session. When you're doing remote viewing, you are really honing your skills of communication and self-observation. You can vet yourself. You can make sure you're not being hoodwinked. And that's really, really important. So, whether you take the course with Ed Dames, I know that I think Stephen Greer offers a course. There's other courses on it, and there are different prices, different approaches to teaching about it. But again, it's something I strongly advise, because once you're in the tribulation, remote viewing, here's where you're going to use it. Think back, we look at ancient cultures back when we were in hunter-gatherer mode, and there was always someone in the clan or the village or the tribe, an old woman or a guy, and they would have this, take chicken entrails or bones or whatever and throw them on the ground, and they'd go, okay, the fish are running in this lake. The game is going to be passing by us to the west. They would know where to find things, know where to find food, know where to find water, shelter, things like that. And so there was that, psychic element. And these ancient tribes understood that it wasn't a foolproof system, but it was better than being totally blind. And remote viewing is a little more sophisticated than reading chicken entrails. and, and it's something where it's not as subjective. So I would strongly advise everyone that's watching to find a course from someone that you like, something that you can afford, and do it.
Absolutely. You know, I've talked to Daz Smith, Dick Algeier, Courtney Brown, and they're all with the Farsight Institute. Courtney's the director. He doesn't do much remote viewing anymore. But I remember back several years ago, I read a book that's been out of print for a while. It came out in the late 90s called Cosmic Voyages that he wrote. And that kind of really opened my mind. And then I got into the Monroe Institute MP3s you can get. And there's also certain beats that have specific sounds and vibrations that will get your mind into like beta state, and then you can get into those lower vibrational frequency modes to where your mind is more able to kind of tap into the Akashic records like you're referring to. And I really like how you brought it all together, because remote viewing really is important. And if you're good at it, see, here's the thing. You've got so many people that have been conditioned to think that kind of stuff is either woo-woo or from the devil, or, you know, they don't realize that you're just using your brain. You're using the brain that God gave you. How is that bad if you're using it for something good? Yet, hey, I mean, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, and I get it, and that's totally cool. Yet I see those opportunities as opportunities. I mean, we have the right to do that. We've been given that, and let's take advantage of it if we can, to help others, help ourselves, and continue to grow. And I mean, there's a lot of accurate information. Like you said, those numbers that are given to people to remote view something, then they feel it, they sense it, they smell it, they see it, and then they talk about it. Well, you can verify that. Either you're on point or you're not. So that is something that you can verify.
Absolutely. I just share one with you. One of the first exercises I did with Ed was he gave us a number and we remote viewed it. And what it was is it was a scene, there was a picture taken from an early battle in World War One, and you could see Allied troops, French troops, I believe, that were advancing on a German position. And when you're doing your remote viewing, you're drawing what you're seeing. But my drawing was very much different from everyone else's in the session. And I was going, wow, you know, did I follow the numbers to some weird place? So after, at a break, I went up to one of his associate instructors. And, you know, when he did these, he had really good people working with him, top-notch people. And I went up and showed him my RV session, and he just was like, his jaw dropped, and he said, I have studied this extensively. He said, you were looking at it from above. Everybody else is looking at it at ground level. You were floating above it and looking down on it. And he said, here's exactly the truth. And because what I had done is I had seen the troop movements, I'd seen the enemy position, I'd seen the Allied advance, but I had seen it from looking down. And so, yeah, getting that validation is really, really important. And, you know, when that for me was when I just said right there, I mean, it was the beginning of the first day, and I just said, yeah, this works. This works. I wouldn't have known it if I hadn't have gone up to one of his instructors. But, you know, just watching, you know, what was happening with him, because his jaw dropped. He's just like, wow, you're really good at this. You know, very, very few people can see it from looking down from above. So this is something you want to do. It's going to help you to, particularly to find places of safety, you know, to find water, to find nourishment, game. Going to make a huge difference in increasing your chances to succeed. And I guess, you know, one other thing that Ed did, particularly with the extraterrestrial angle, and he was asked about the Anunnaki. And Ed was pretty coy. He just he mispronounced the word and then moved off topic very quickly. And so that really told me that, Ed's not one to do that, instead of saying Anunnaki, to say something like Anuhookie, Hookie, Lukey, or something like that. That's not Ed's way. Not unless he's got to dodge and weave, because it's a real hot button topic. And as I told you in our last interview, when you take Anunnaki and Planet X and you connect the two topics together, that is when you're going to have problem. You can talk about the Anunnaki historically all you want, but once you bring them into present tense, that is a whole nother thing. And in my previous book, Being in It for the Species, The Universe Speaks, I speak extensively about the Anunnaki and what they're going to do. One of the things is that there's going to be body harvesting, body parts harvesting. We're going to see death centers. For those of you who remember the old movie Soylent Green with Charlton Heston,
It's people.
Soylent Green is people. Right.
Classic.
Okay. Well,
I've heard that. Hey, I got to throw something out there real quick because you brought it up, Marshall. I got to throw in my 2 cents for a second. I'm sure you've read those articles about how almost every time they've tested food and these giant conglomerates and franchises, I'm not going to make specific names. You can look it up for yourself, folks. They find human DNA in burgers, and it's like, how does it get there? How is there human DNA in burgers unless there's human DNA in the freaking burgers? Wake up.
Well, that's what we're going to see. What we're going to see, what I write about Being in It for the Species. The Anunnaki are coming. They have to repair their atmosphere because their atmosphere is torn up by the flyby through the core of our system. And so they need gold to repair their atmosphere. They're going to leave with virtually all of the refined gold we have on the planet. But they're also going to take a lot of women for slave breeding programs. But also there's going to be body harvesting that's happening here with the elites. And there will be assisted suicide centers. And if you just feel like that's it, I've had enough, you go to an assisted suicide center and you will do something that, and when that happens, people will say, you're taking the blade. And, it's interesting. I wrote about this. And you can actually see the device in a movie called Cloud Atlas with Tom Hanks. And it's probably my most favorite film. But they have a helmet that goes on the head, and at the back is a pneumatic device with a long, thin blade in it. And when they trigger the device, it sends the blade into the top of it goes right in the base of the skull and severs you at the spine. Death at that point is absolutely instantaneous. This is where sharpshooters aim for. They call it the apricot. And that's the area that they want to put their bullet, because if they hit you in the apricot, you're dead before you even know you're dead. It's just that fast. And so, that's how people will be terminated, and then their bodies will be harvested. And the bodies will be converted. They will become a protein source. There will be wafers that's made of the protein. And however, one of the things that they're going to do will be interesting as to exactly when the line was cut.
Oh yeah, it seems like whenever we get into something really meaty, that's when it just shut down.
Yeah. Sending a message. And but I'm going to finish this.
Good idea.
And what they're going to do, and if we drop, we're going to come back and we're going to do it. We're going to finish this. We are
Perfect.
going to finish this. So, for those of you out there who are hitting your buttons and interrupting, you're welcome to call attention to the evil that you do so that others can see it more clearly. But one of the things I find really sad about this, because most of the people that go to these triage centers, they're just going to be tired of, that's it. There's no hope. Uh, they're going to be sick. They're going to be despondent, and they just want a quick and easy way out. And that's it. It'll be a very selfish way of going. Or they're going to go because they know that they're a burden on their loved ones and they want their loved ones to have a better, chance of making it. But then the part that for me is really was very, very hard. When I wrote Being in It for the Species, The Universe Speaks, there were days I just was devastated with what I was learning. They're going to make a special program for young men and women who are very healthy with no major diseases. They don't have a reason to suicide. They're going to want their reproductive organs. For the men, the testicles. For the women in particular, they're going to want ovaries, fallopian tubes. They're going to want that. But also they're going to want them for their brains. These young people will be offered a deal that if they sacrifice their life, their family, their loved ones will be allowed to relocate to safer areas. So they're going to sacrifice themselves for their families. And then what will happen is after they take the blade, immediately they will be beheaded, and the brains will then be taken out and created into a puree, which will be like a protein shake, because the life force energy, the prana, will be very strong in those brains. And there are going to be those that are going to desire that as a delicacy. Not only, and they're going to be from other races. Basically, the Anunnaki are going to set up a cosmic cafeteria. And then they're going to harvest the reproductive parts. And then the rest of it will be, turned into Soylent Green. And this for me was, everything in that book was really hard for me, but this was just sleepless nights thinking about this, of wonderful young people who got their whole lives ahead of themselves, taking the blade just so that they can do something for their families, for their loved ones, self-sacrifice. That's really sad. And so the Anunnaki what they're going to do is going to be incredibly ugly, incredibly ugly. And the reason why we were intercepted in the call and terminated was we hit the key word, and they pulled the plug on us. But here we are. And if they want to pull the plug, they can just reinforce the point. And Rex, I can tell you, the only reason why I do this, and I've stayed in it, I did my first article on Planet X, January 2002. I've been researching Earth changes since 1999 and publishing. But the only thing that keeps me in it, I do not have children. If I had children, I would not be doing what I do today.
Well, I mean, you certainly put yourself on the front lines, and it seems as if sometimes when people like yourself and others that are, whistleblowers, truth seekers, and basically ostracizing themselves from others because what they feel is so important and what is so important they present to them, it just reminds me of the superhero, supervillain archetype. The supervillain always gets all the gold, all the toys, all the recognition, all the women, and then the superhero is the one that's getting attacked by those he's protecting, can never have a girlfriend because she might be in danger, always has to hide who he really is, even though he's helping others, poverty, whatever. Unless you're Bruce Wayne, it seems like you're always in that. So it's interesting how that's presented to people. And it's just like, if it's a part of your life path, it is. And there's those charlatans out there that make lots of money in other aspects. And what you do, if you want to be a millionaire, it's certainly not going to be selling books, in my opinion, unless you're doing Harry Potter type stuff.
As I like to say, as a Planet X researcher, you have real benefits. First benefit, you have the right to pursue the truth to the bottom of an unmarked grave. And the second one is you get to drive used cars for the rest of your life. Oil drip pan not included, And third benefit is you don't have to worry about Christmas cards. No one's going to send them to you anymore.
That's terrible. Terrible.
Yeah, they all think you're crazy. So, yeah, it's a loveless proposition, but, it's the life. It's the life, это жизнь, as they say in Russian. What people don't understand is a lot of the stuff that you see in YouTube comments, Facebook, and these are all paid disinformationalists with multiple personas. And this is how they pay for their vodka and their child support, okay? Pretending to be somebody else, writing caustic comments, deriding people, demeaning people. Many of those, the majority of those kind of comments, they're not coming from ne'er-do-wells and trolls. They're coming from people who get paid to do that.
And then they'll say, oh, well, it's just a job. It's just a job. Everybody's got to have a job. Well, okay, but look at all the other opportunities out there. Do you get paid that good as a disinformation agent on the internet, or as a troll, that it's worth it to you and your conscience? If it is, hey, I'm not judging. That's up to you. I mean, I like to listen to my conscience, and I feel that that's my guide. What about other people out there? Do they just not listen, or do they not have it? I mean, if you don't have a conscience, how can you judge that person, right? They're a sociopath. How do you get to that?
Well, these people that do it have their dispositions are pretty much like petty retail clerks. They're the kind of people that would see you standing in line with holding something in your hand, and they know you're in the wrong line just by seeing what you're holding in your hand. But they wait until you get up to the counter so that they can say, you're standing in the wrong line. You got to go over there and spend another 2 hours at another line, just so that they can have their little exercise of power over you. These are very small, petty people. They've had disappointing and miserable lives, and they derive vicarious pleasure from being mean and caustic to others about what is irrelevant to them. It's just the power trip of doing it anonymously, especially. And that's how they do it. If you trace it back, a lot of it actually comes from the crown in England. This is a city-state like the Vatican in Rome, but it's a city-state in London. And the crown is where a tremendous amount of this, and they do IP spoofing, so they look like they're in the United States, but they're really not. They're, some yutz who's probably half in the bag from vodka, sitting in an internet cafe somewhere with a laptop.
Absolutely. It's certainly incredible times we live in. There's some great material available at YOWUSA.com. You've got access to Planet X, Surviving the Tribulation, Being in It for the Species, which got Marshall into some hot water there for a while, and the Colburn Bible. You'll have access to current events, the latest information on Planet X, aka Nibiru, the Winged Destroyer, all available at YOWUSA.com. So, Marshall, it's a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, it's my pleasure, and good luck with that dating service.
Oh, yeah. We'll keep working on that. That'll be the next level. So,
All right.
all right. And folks, also check out leakproject.com. You'll have access to a bounty of gourmet podcasts there. We've got some great t-shirts available and high-end decals. They're all limited edition. Also subscribe to our YouTube channels, youtube.com/clandestine Time Lord and William Wallace. Stay safe, everybody. Be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. Talk to you soon.